Micah wants to continue with the gas station theme, so we're going to talk about this here one. This is Lawrence Billick's gas station. It would be located behind what is now Scotty's Log Bar in the 1920s. He probably would have started a little bit sooner than that, and he will make it bigger as time goes on. Eventually he will add on a mechanic shop with a pit where the car would come in and he could just walk down underneath the pit. And then these pictures over here will show how he put the awnings on in the 1920s. And then he'll have kids. He'll ask children to come and give him license plates. And he will cover the walls and the ceiling with license plates from all over, which became quite a tourist attraction. You just come off of Highway 10, fill up with gas. He put in bathrooms, which was an unusual thing also in the 1930s. And then after World War II, the highway department wants to widen Highway 10. And so this means many houses from the Dairy Queen that we know now all the way up to Scotty's Log Bar have to go. Houses, businesses, and one of them will be Lawrence Billick's gas station. He will be literally the last building torn down or moved. And then he will build the building up by the Holiday gas station now that's yellow in color, and he was Standard Oil. And he too had two-stall garage gas station. It will get bought out by the Krugers and then the Mesters. And after that, I think Rick Kowalczyk gets it. Don't quote me on that one. But so he did that for 30 or 40 years. We have many newspaper clippings of his retirement and all of that for him. We also had another gas station that was actually standing on that spot. It was owned by a William Bobick from Bolus, whose children will go on to become boxers. He will have run a small Texaco gas station with a mechanic shop. Lawrence Billick will buy it from the Bobicks, tear it down, and then build the new standard gas station, which had bathrooms and picnic tables in the back, pine trees, makes it very homey for people to come and visit. He did that here too with the bathrooms. That was a fascinating thing. Bathrooms were the thing for gas stations. They got the people to come. They had what you call way rooms for women with small children that they could go in and rest with their children. We also had a gas stations down by the Dairy Queen halfways up. That too had a small gas station in there. Along the highway there was also a place where crystals had so they could fill up with oil for heating for people's houses. There were several houses. 7 houses got torn down. 5 businesses had to be taken out. On Highway 10 at one time was a flour mill owned by a Fusi, and that got emptied and stayed abandoned for many years until they tore it down and used the wood for other things. I'm trying to think, what else did we tear down? Oh, there also a very big, large building was next to Scotty's. When it got torn down, it was a Gamble's, but it used to be a drugstore on the bottom, and the Dr. Watson and McGonigal had their doctor's offices upstairs. And in the 1930s, the doctors moved downstairs and went across the street in what is now an abandoned building, but to most people was an antique store. And the drugstore was the big windows that faced City Hall, and the doctor's offices faced the bar. Then there was, next to that was a little grocery store called Lloydie's Market. At one time it was a little hamburger shop owned by Schwartz that was called Puno's. On the very corner where the stoplight is, it originally was a bank. There's a vault in there if you look through the windows. And then the post office got moved into there. Before that, it was an old wooden structured building, the Rock Shop building, and he literally picked that up because he was a general store, buy everything there. He picked it up, puts it onto the road, and builds the brick building that we see now. And he put all kinds of things went into it. Originally, he in the back had his shop facing the windows facing City Hall. He had his store, and then the front was a bank. We go down the street from there. Micah, turn around, and we will use this wonderful child's thing that the 6th graders made many years ago. we'll look at this. This is the rock shop as we know it. It was a bank originally. Next to it is now a 10-spot bar. It was originally built for no reason. It was called the Keywall Building from the Keywall Brewing Company in Little Falls. First, the bar was in the basement. Nothing was on the main floor. And eventually the bar will move upstairs. And now when Deb and them have the bar now where you sit to listen to the music and eat, it was originally a hardware store. Fitzman had it. He had his store farther way down by the Holiday gas station, and he put himself in there and he sold hardware stuff. That building will stay a hardware store for many years until the 1920s when it will become a restaurant. Many people will have the restaurant. It'll open and close for 20 or 30 years before it finally stays a restaurant. The little green building is a barber shop that was built by Dr. McGonagall's father, who was one of the original people of Royalton. And he had his confectionery in there. He sold candy. Pool hall in the back, which is a big no-no. Next to it is a bank, but eventually that'll become many different things also. And then on the far corner, for most of us, we remember it as Don's Cafe, B's Cafe, Dixie's Diner. It originally will start out as a pharmacy on the bottom with the doctors being upstairs, and the open staircase is open, but we only know it as closed, but it still was there and all doctors were upstairs. That only had the first original telephone was in that building, and you would call that, and Dr. McGonagall, when he was young, little boy, his job was to run to people and say, there's a phone message for you. And he got paid a few pennies for doing that. Then across the street would have been other stores that would continue all the way down to the Easy Stop. The changes constantly. Livery stables. There was where the yellow brick building is now, that was Standard Oil, was a 2-story hotel built by the Colbys. And that stayed in business for about 20 years because directly across the street was a train steeple. And so then they would come across and stay there. There was another hotel where we now have the City Hall, the community center. That was a hotel. And so we had 2 hotels. They were both 2 stories. Both could hold about 12 to 14 people. They each had dining halls in them. They would hold parties at them. The one that was over by the Easy Stop Holiday gas station, that was large enough that did banquet dinners. It could hold a couple hundred people if they needed to. And they would often do that for whatever reasons. We had a lot of politicians that would come. The Boucks, B-O-U-C-K, were our state representatives. They won many times for our district. And they lived here in Royalton, and so there were a lot of the constituents from the state capital would come up here. The governors, we had many governors come and stay here and eat there and visit. Across the street there was the train depot where Rick has that little building now, just a little brown building. Behind that, where Rick has his towing now, was a stockyard. There was a grain elevator, flour elevator back there built by Mr. Colby also, who built the hotel. There were many houses along that way. We have the grain elevator that we see now was there, and that caught on fire, and within a month he built it to be the size that it is now and covered it in steel. Next to it, where the railroad crossing is, the railroad crossing was farther over than where it is now. It's more towards the south. And we had a pavilion, a bandstand, and trees and parks, and we had a town band. And every Wednesday evening during the summers they performed there. Anyone could come. They encouraged you. People from all over came to perform. They sang, they danced, they did all kinds of things, and that was a free concert. In 1947, when the highway became wider and all of those buildings had to be torn down, they needed to also center the railroad track better, so we lost the park. So they picked up the gazebo and pulled down the trees, and it was all gone. There was where the Tesco gas station is now was also a grain elevator that burnt down in the 1950s. There was another building alongside of that. That too all got torn down with the fire. And then the gas station will come in like we see it now, which has changed hands and shapes. Down by the Dairy Queen, that's where the flour mill was. Somewhere along that. Highway 10 did not exist as we know it. There was a railroad crossing that came over across the river to the flour mill. We had a barrel making factory down there that made wooden barrels. We could produce 100 barrels of flour a day out of that factory. There was grain fields everywhere. In the 1900 or so, it caught on fire, and that was the end of that. There is, if you were to stay at the Dairy Queen and drive towards the east, there's a house now, but there used to be a dam right there, and you would be able to drive over that dam and go out and come out on the other side of the Riverside Cemetery. That will rush out in the 1920s, and that's gone. There is the grist mill. The wheel is still here. We got those from England. They were $1,500 a piece. There were 4 wheels. There's 1 wheel left, and it sits behind the community center. And then we have pieces of rock here from another one. So when that burnt down, that ended that. So the barrel factory. But down there were hotels. There were stores. All kinds of businesses were down on that end. That's what they called Lower Town. We are here in the center of town, is Middletown, and just up by the Holiday gas station is considered Upper Town, whatever that means. You'll read that in the newspapers. We had a flour sawmill. That will be located in the valley where the bridge is now, and behind where Scott Collis lives, down in there is a sawmill. That too will catch on fire around 1900, 1901. That too employed many men. And at noon the whistle would go off and it was time for lunch. You would hear that. Everyone used that as their go-home whistle. It was dying anyways. The lumber business around 1900 is dying. They have logged themselves out in Little Falls everywhere. The logs came from around Platte Lake, up by Bulldog Lake, up that way, came down. The river was much wider than we see it now because they made it that way so that the logs could come. There were places partway down the river that had huge ropes. There are still in people's yards that are now buried, concrete with gigantic rings that they would tie ropes around to hold the logs back. It was a pool, a huge pool on the south side of the bridge that we could go and rent canoes and paddle ourselves around in the pond if we wanted during the summer months. We had, they put trout. Every spring the men would put trout in there so we could go trout fishing. It was a booming town, 1,500 people. But by 1910, we're back down to 600, 500 people. Everyone left. It was a mass exit. We will pull up stakes and we're going to go west. And we go to Washington State and to Oregon where they're logging there. And they stay. It's Northern California. So our population dwindles to what we have now. At one point we had 7 bars, a couple of hotels, all kinds of businesses. In the 1919, we have a car dealership. It's in the abandoned building next to the flower shop. There was a different building there, and that was a car dealership. And that went on for a few years. Our fire hall has always been where it is. It just changed the shape and size. It originally was horses, and they came out onto Center Street. The horses did, instead of, well, we see them coming out now facing the east. Then the building will be condemned because it's just rotted. Inside of there is a well, and that was making the building rot. And so we had it got condemned by the state, and a brick building will get built. And eventually that one will get torn down, and what we see now in the 1980s when that one was built. There was a library that sits where the little park benches are now that the Royalton Women's Study Club built. while I have putting on programs, selling cookies. It was a WPA project. We have pictures of the building. And that got tore down when the new fire hall got up. It accidentally got cracked by the men taking down the old fire hall, and that building had to be torn down. That's a WPA project. Another WPA project is the Royalton Elementary Gym that was built in the mid-1930s. That was hand dug, and also using horses with dregs, and they pulled all the dirt out and put it onto what we know as the football field across the street on the north side of the building. It got an award for its craftsmanship. A year or so later, the floor got flooded. Water got left on a drinking fountain, and it flooded the basement, and it flooded the beautiful maplewood floor. They put it up to 130 degrees, the newspaper reads, trying to dry it out, but it continued to bubble, and they replaced it. It will be, for those who remember, the floor bubbled for years into the 1970s. The floor every spring and fall would bubble until they have now the new floor like we see now and there.